So, the War of 1812. It's a war that isn't often talked about these days, but it still had a significant impact on America and could be one of the main reasons that we're still as patriotic as we are today. Also known as the Second Revolution, it's a pretty important thing, and it's kind of weird how it's just kind of swept under the rug like that. So, if this war is so important, you might be thinking, uh, why did it even happen? Trust me, at this point, the waters, were not peaceful. So, like, why would we go to war with Britain again, you may think? Like, didn't we just beat them a couple decades before this? Well, this is true, we didn't immediately become buddy-buddy with Britain right after the Revolution. That took a long time, and this is one of the many bumpy steps. At this point, Britain was in an intense battle with France, who was currently led by Napoleon, and he was conquering a lot of Europe and a huge threat to the British. Of course, the British wanted to take every precaution they could to stop France's seemingly endless conquest, and America decided to be neutral in the conflict, but they still had some trade with France. The British were, of course, upset by this. They got a little too hot and started attacking American trade ships to France. Of course, this made America especially mad because they decided to be neutral, but now they had been put to the edge, and the beast had been unleashed. So, you may assume from the name that the war only lasted less than 1 year, it just happened during 1812, but that would actually be wrong. The war lasted from June 18th, 1812 to February 18th, 1815. The war, as described earlier, was a direct result of the Napoleonic Wars, which were going on at the time, so this kind of made America an ally to the French, because now they were both at war with the UK, although America had never really gotten any trouble with Russia or other European countries, but they did have some enemies. For one, the semi-independent British colony of Canada was a great asset to the British and is where a good deal of the fighting happened, at least, in the north. Also, the British once again found an ally in the native tribes that were being forced off their land by the Americans. Of course, they were happy to help the British because they wanted to protect their land from the western expansion, but this war only boosted American patriotism, which they would feel the brunt of, unfortunately, a bit later in the country's history. So, I've talked a lot about patriotism boost after the war, but I haven't really explained why, have I? For the most part, this was about the battles that America had won against the British in multiple major cities, like Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and New Orleans. The latter two were victories for the US and boosted those people's patriotism, but D.C. was different. D.C. was more similar to 9/11 or a terrorist attack than any of these battles. It was a tragedy. The place was burned to the ground, most notably the White House, meaning Americans would never again set foot in the rooms of the first presidents, which is something a lot of people forget about. Like 9/11, the events here made Americans band together and only increased their fighting spirit against the British, who at this point were now their most bitter rival. The war also allowed them to love the French even more, distracting the British with the currently and frankly larger war going on in Europe. Overall, all of these things combined created a concoction of triumph and tragedy that caused the American spirit to fly high and showed the world that they weren't some rogue state, they were a great power and a force to be reckoned with. So, in the end, the War of 1812 only served to increase American morale and patriotism, and served as the final stamp of approval to be recognized as a powerful nation. The burning of DC and the victories across the country caused the Americans to win, and eventually lead to the westward expansion. This really was a second revolution. America had to once again prove their worth against Britain, and again they won and stood defiant. The Americans were given a new morale that eventually caused them to be the most powerful nation on earth and a recognized power.